Have you ever felt that your life was somehow predetermined by someone else's favor? I remember my childhood as a series of moments where every celebration, every family gathering, silently declared that one of us was cherished while another was left to wonder if love could ever be enough. Growing up, I often found myself on the fringes of joy, a quiet observer to the lavish acknowledgments bestowed upon my brother, whose every accomplishment shone brightly in the family spotlight. Even in those early years, amidst the laughter and the clamor of festive celebrations, there lingered a subtle message that I was somehow less favored, less important. I was constantly reminded by the little things: a tattered sweater passed off as a gift, the whispered sighs of regret when a small, overlooked present replaced something grand. But in the midst of this quiet neglect, a single verse resonated in my heart: "For I know the plans I have for you." I heard those words often, spoken softly by my mother during bedtime prayers, and they offered a glimmer of hope that, despite everything, there was a greater design at work. As I sat in our modest study, bathed in the soft glow of late afternoon light filtering through the window, I would lose myself in the delicate dance of shadows and memories. The aroma of my mother's tea mingled with the scent of old paper from a leather journal that chronicled not just our family's history, but the silent dreams of a boy determined to rewrite his fate. In those moments of solitude, I began to wonder if every setback and every tear shed in silence was, in fact, a stepping stone towards something magnificent, a future far beyond the narrow definitions of favoritism. There was an undeniable power in that idea, that every challenge I faced, every slight and every moment of disregard, was secretly preparing me for a destiny of my own making. I started to see that the bitterness of unequal treatment was not the end of my story, but rather the opening lines of a journey that would ultimately be defined by my perseverance. Each quiet night spent wrestling with self-doubt became a lesson in resilience, a turning point where I chose to believe that my worth was not measured by the unspoken comparisons of the past. Instead, it was forged in the fires of my own determination. I began to accept that the path I was walking, though rough and marred by hardships, held within it the promise of transformation. Even as I questioned the fairness of life, I clung tightly to that sacred promise in the verse, trusting that every setback was paving the way for a breakthrough that was uniquely mine. And now, as I reflect on those early moments of introspection and quiet defiance, I invite you to see your struggles as not the end, but the beginning of a story that, with faith and determination, can defy expectations and reshape destiny. For it is often in the silent, overlooked hours that the foundation for our greatest triumphs is built, and I have come to believe that my journey is just getting started. Growing up, my earliest memories are a bittersweet tapestry woven with both celebration and quiet sorrow, a constant reminder that, in our family, love was measured in degrees, and I was always on the lighter end of the scale. I remember those Christmas mornings so vividly. While the house buzzed with excitement and the tree glittered with colorful ornaments, there was an unmistakable difference in the offerings. My older brother Jason would tear into his presents, his eyes lighting up as he discovered a brand new PlayStation, a symbol of lavish generosity and endless possibility, while I stood quietly with my faded clearance t-shirt, a token that, in its simplicity, spoke volumes about the unequal distribution of affection and resources. Each shimmering gift he received felt like a personal rebuke, a silent declaration that his value was measured by what he got, while mine was forever overlooked. As the years went by, these disparities only deepened. I vividly recall a turning point in my teenage years when, at 16, Jason drove off in a pristine, new Honda Civic, a gleaming emblem of success and parental pride, while I had nothing more than a used bicycle with a flat tire. Every time I pedaled through the neighborhood, the worn rubber and deflated tire mirrored the hollowness I felt inside, as if each rotation was echoing the constant reminder that I was given far less than I deserved. It wasn't simply about the possessions, it was the way every celebration, every accolade, was wrapped in a veneer of unspoken comparisons. Our birthdays, our milestones, and even our academic achievements were weighed against his effortless triumphs. I remember a school event where Jason's academic scholarship was celebrated with heartfelt applause and lavish attention, a fully funded college tuition that promised a future of success, while my efforts were acknowledged only by a stack of financial aid forms and a few obligatory, distant congratulatory remarks. In the quiet moments that followed these celebrations, sitting alone in my dimly lit room, I would replay the subtle, painful signals of inequality. The sight of Jason's trophies and certificates, each symbolizing an opportunity one was denied, would haunt me as I tried to piece together a sense of self-worth from the scraps of comparisons. I began to wonder if all these injustices were not merely cruel twists of fate but rather challenges meant to test my resolve. Late at night, with only the soft glow of a desk lamp for company, I would pore over an old family album, tracing the smiles and milestones that illuminated his path while mine remained shrouded in quiet shadows. I could not help but ask myself, was my destiny irrevocably defined by this persistent lack, an endless cycle of overlooking the potential in me? And yet, amidst these painful recollections, a tiny ember of defiance began to kindle inside me. I found solace in the idea that perhaps every slight, every neglected moment, was not a verdict against my future, but rather a subtle lesson in resilience. I would cling to the gentle wisdom of scriptures, recalling the words from Proverbs 11 verse 1, which remind us that honest scales belong to the Lord, and in that assurance, I discovered a promise of divine fairness. Deep down, I started to believe that my struggles were secretly preparing me for a destiny that I alone would shape, free from the predetermined paths of favoritism. Each slight, whether it was a gift that barely mattered or an achievement that was eclipsed by comparison, transformed into a quiet vow: no matter how often I was overlooked, I would cultivate my own worth and create a legacy defined by my own hard work. These years of feeling sidelined were not without their lessons. While the memories of that old, tattered clearance t-shirt and the worn-out bicycle often brought a pang of sorrow, they also became the crucible in which I forged my determination. I learned early that true value wasn't bestowed by others, it had to be discovered and nurtured from within. I began to see that the emotional scars of favoritism were not just marks of neglect but the very foundation upon which I would build my strength. Every overlooked opportunity, every instance of silent comparison, stoked a fire in my heart, a relentless drive to prove that I could measure up not by others' standards, but by my own. In a world where I was constantly reminded of my lesser worth, I started to craft a secret promise to myself, that one day, I would rise above these limitations and redefine what it meant to be truly valued. Looking back now, I realize that those moments of unfairness, as painful as they were, shaped me in ways I never imagined. They pushed me to question the status quo, to challenge the idea that one's worth is predetermined by external markers. In the quiet recesses of my heart, I nurtured a growing conviction that my story was far from over, that the bitterness I experienced in my youth was merely the opening chapter of a much larger, self-determined saga. And so, even as the weight of every missed opportunity and every overshadowed victory pressed upon me, I clung to the belief that I had the power to rewrite my destiny. For it is in the struggle against injustice that we often find the seeds of our greatest transformation, a truth that has become the cornerstone of my journey. Every act of neglect I suffered became a stepping stone toward a future I vowed to build, a testament to the strength of a spirit unbound by favoritism. In this quiet, relentless rebellion against a predetermined fate, I discovered that the true cost of favoritism was not merely measured in material disparities, but in the lost chances that, ultimately, prepared me for a breakthrough that would redefine my life. Graduation day should have been the pinnacle of joy, a culminating moment where every achievement and every proud smile coalesces into promise. But for me, it unfolded as the turning point that would forever reshape my destiny and awaken the fighting spirit within. I vividly remember walking onto that stage under the clear blue sky, my heart thudding with a mix of pride and an ever-present undercurrent of discontent, as the applause thundered around me and families cheered in celebration. Amid the sea of congratulatory faces, I could see the undeniable glow of adoration reserved for my older brother, Jason, whose graduation was marked by promises of an extravagant party and a future already infused with luxury, while I was left standing there as an afterthought, a mere secondary note to a story pre-written by favoritism. As I stepped forward to receive my very own token of recognition, my hand trembled slightly, not from excitement, but from the weight of years spent watching others bask in the light of success while I was relegated to shadows. With my name called, a faculty member in a crisp uniform approached and handed me a plain white envelope that seemed almost out of place amid the pomp of the event. Hesitantly, I broke the seal and unfolded the contents, only to reveal a meager $2 lottery scratch-off ticket. In that instant, an overwhelming mix of disbelief and bitter irony surged within me. Here I was, at the very threshold of what should have been a celebration of my ascent, yet my gift, a faded, easily dismissed slip of paper, was a silent declaration that my accomplishments were worth barely a fraction of what others received. I stood there frozen, absorbing the irony that this insignificant ticket could encapsulate the entire history of my life, a life marked by being constantly overlooked, where every heartfelt milestone was diminished by the weight of unspoken comparisons. Instead of glittering accolades or generous tokens of achievement, I received what felt like a stark reminder of the injustices that had defined my upbringing. While the cheers and jubilant laughter echoed around me, my mind raced as I reflected on the countless times I had been sidelined, on the memories of birthdays and celebrations where my efforts had been met with only a perfunctory nod. With each passing second, a seed of defiance took root within me, fanned by the realization that this $2 ticket was not simply a cruel joke or a token of neglect, it was a challenge. It was as if fate, in its enigmatic wisdom, had offered me a sign that I was meant to forge my own destiny, to rise above the confines of a life dictated by favoritism. In the moments after that disheartening gesture, as I retraced my steps off the stage, the celebrations around me took on a dual nature. They were both an acknowledgement of an ending and the faint, quiet prelude to a new beginning, one that I alone had the power to shape. I found myself caught in a swirl of emotions, where the external pomp of the day masked an internal tumult of anger, sorrow, and a rapidly emerging resolve. I began to question why my story was written in the margins of someone else's grand narrative, why my worth was measured by a trifling slip of paper. In that crucible of conflicting feelings, I made a silent vow that I would no longer allow my future to be defined by moments of neglect, but rather by the unyielding strength that arises from the most unlikely challenges. As I sat later that day, alone with my thoughts and the distant echo of celebration, I allowed myself to revisit every slight, every instance of being overlooked, each serving as a reminder of how deeply ingrained my sense of inadequacy was. And yet, right there in the quiet aftermath of a day that was supposed to epitomize achievement, I recognized something transformative emerging from within. That small, unassuming lottery ticket, in its stark simplicity, ignited a spark that promised change. It compelled me to confront the systemic patterns of favoritism that had shadowed my entire life and to harness the latent potential within me to challenge those very definitions. I began to see that the true worth of a person is not measured by the grand celebrations thrown in their honor, but by the quiet battles fought in the spaces between applause and neglect. Every moment of denial, every instance of being undervalued, had been meticulously preparing me for that day, a day that served as both an end and a beginning. With each heartbeat, I felt a mounting determination, a drive that told me that no matter how small the token or how meager the gesture, my future was mine to claim. That day, as I walked away from the stage burdened yet buoyed by a newfound clarity, I embraced the challenge laid out before me. I took that $2 ticket, not as a symbol of defeat, but as a spark, a promise that from the ashes of disregard, I would build a destiny defined entirely on my own terms. In the aftermath of that profound moment, I pledged to myself that I would never again allow anyone's measure of worth to dictate my value. I began to imagine a life where every setback, every token of neglect, was transformed into the raw material from which success is forged. And so, as the echoes of the ceremony faded and the jubilant noise receded into a quiet resolve, I stepped into the uncertain future with a fierce determination to rewrite the narrative, to transform every slight into a stepping stone toward the life I was destined to build. That graduation day may have been framed by the masks of celebration, but underneath it all, it became the catalyst that awakened the relentless spirit inside me, setting me on a course to reclaim my identity and redefine my destiny forever. Every morning, I awaken in my cramped, fading apartment where the persistent buzz of an old refrigerator and the musty scent of worn-out curtains remind me that time waits for no one and that every new day is another battle in the quiet war of survival. I drag myself out of bed with a heavy heart, knowing that the hours ahead will be spent chasing the elusive dream of stability. Each minute etched with the sound of a ticking clock that echoes the limitations of my reality. With limited resources and an ever-looming pressure to make rent, I push myself to face the world, stepping out into the relentless rhythm of the city that feels both indifferent and unforgiving, where the promise of change seems as distant as the morning light. By day, I clock in at a small marketing firm where the fluorescent lights hum overhead, and the constant clatter of keyboards and phones fills the air as I work on crafting campaigns packed with cheesy slogans and half-forgotten taglines. Each keystroke feels like a small act of defiance against the cycles of mediocrity that threaten to swallow me whole. As I try to squeeze every ounce of enthusiasm into pitch-perfect ideas despite feeling like every word is weighted down by the fatigue of endless routine. In that sterile office space, while my colleagues exchange knowing glances over cups of lukewarm coffee and meager paychecks, I feel the quiet desperation of chasing something that always seems just out of reach, a subtle reminder with every jaded sigh and furtive glance at the clock that my dreams are still on hold, waiting for a sign that I matter more than the sum of these monotonous hours. Then comes the evening shift at the retro diner, where the neon lights flicker in relentless rhythm and the clink of cutlery mixes with the sizzle of greasy fries and the murmur of late-night conversations. Here, I don a worn uniform and serve table after table of hungry customers, each order adding another layer to the numbed familiarity of my double life. Every shift in the diner is a study in contradictions. The warmth of hot coffee and the bitter taste of exhaustion intermingle as I listen to the soft chatter of regulars and the distant hum of a jukebox spinning out old tunes, all while grappling with the reality that this night shift is just another link in the chain of sacrifices I must make in order to keep the lights on and the rent paid. In those fleeting moments between orders and whispered thanks, I watch my reflection in a stained mirror behind the counter, seeing in those tired eyes a reflection of my relentless struggle, a battle not just against time, but against the lingering whispers that told me I would never be any more than a cog in a vast, indifferent machinery. Every small victory in that familiar cycle, however fleeting, was a cherished anomaly, a well-earned nod in the midst of daily defeat, and on many nights, after the clamor of the diner had faded to a quiet murmur, I would return to my modest apartment, the silence punctuated only by the hum of tired appliances and the occasional drip from a leaky faucet. There, I sat alone, nursing a cold cup of coffee as dusk turned into the quiet loneliness of night, and I would question if every setback, every scraped rib of exhaustion, was simply a prelude to a breakthrough that I could barely envision. In those solitary moments, I found solace in the words of Romans 12 verse 2, a simple verse that urged me not to conform to the patterns of this weary world, but to transform myself through the renewing of my mind, a small flame of hope that whispered that every hardship was chiseling away at the bedrock of my character, refining me, preparing me for the day when I could finally reshape my own destiny. The relentless grind, with all its endless hours of work and an ever-pressing to-do list of survival, became both my punishment and my crucible. Each day was a test, a rigorous lesson in resilience as I battled not only the external forces that sought to keep me trapped, but also the internal murmurings of doubt and despair that threatened to overwhelm me. Every groggy morning and every tired night was a silent affirmation that my spirit was being forged in the fires of adversity, that every moment spent on the assembly line of menial tasks was slowly, inexorably building the strength I would one day need to break free of the confines of this exhausting existence. I began to see that the grind was not merely a series of unfortunate events, but a long, arduous journey that was crafting me into someone new, a person armed with the determination born of hard lessons and the unyielding hope that even the longest days can metamorphose into a future defined by my own unbreakable will. I recall the countless hours spent at that marketing firm, where the buzz of the copier, the relentless ringing of phones, and the soft whir of outdated computers became the soundtrack of my struggle. I saw in those moments the faces of coworkers who, like me, were quietly dreaming of something beyond the daily grind, silently allied in the common understanding that we were all fighting to carve out a sliver of hope in a world that often seemed to have forgotten us. And then, under the sterile glare of the diner's neon, I found fragments of fleeting connection, brief smiles exchanged with a regular customer, a nod of understanding from a fellow server, or even a kind word whispered between shifts, that reminded me that even in the darkest moments, humanity had a way of shining through the cracks. Each of these small interactions served as a counterpoint to the long hours of solitude, reinforcing the quiet, stubborn belief that even the longest days eventually yield to the promise of dawn. As the days merged into nights and the nights back into days, I learned to measure my worth not by the number of hours I toiled or by the fatigue that draped over me like a shroud, but by the quiet, persistent determination that propelled me forward even when every part of me screamed to stop. I discovered that within the monotonous rhythm of hardship lay the raw material of transformation, waiting patiently to be molded into something far greater than the sum of its parts. The grind, harsh and unyielding as it was, had become a crucible for my personal evolution, a meticulous process in which every small sacrifice built the foundation of a future where my struggles would not define me but rather empower me to triumph. Now, as I reflect on those relentless days, I see how every early morning, every sluggish commute, every long expanse of silence punctuated by the clatter of a tired office or the buzz of a late-night diner, was a silent lesson in perseverance. It was within the seemingly insignificant details, the muted hum of machinery, the flicker of neon lights through rain-soaked windows, and the soft murmur of late-night prayers, that I discovered the true essence of resilience. In those long, arduous hours, I was not just surviving, I was quietly transforming, building within myself a reservoir of strength that would one day allow me to rise above the limitations of the present and to forge a new, brighter path for my future. Every exhausted breath, every drop of sweat, Every moment spent in the quiet agony of the grind was a quiet declaration that I would not succumb to the challenges laid before me. Instead, I began to shape those hardships into the very impetus for change, a promise that the unmet potential and the silent sacrifices of my past were merely the prelude to the triumphs yet to come. And so, even amidst the unending cycle of work, exhaustion, and uncertain hope, I held on to the belief that this struggle was preparing me for a destiny that was entirely my own, one where the countless grueling moments of yesterday would serve as the foundation for the victory of tomorrow. Each day in that relentless grind, though fraught with pain and perseverance, was a stepping stone, a necessary chapter in the story of a man who learned to thrive in the face of adversity, ready to transform every ounce of hardship into the unstoppable drive of a spirit reborn. I was in the midst of another long, uneventful afternoon, methodically sorting through piles of old receipts and forgotten memories in my cluttered apartment, when my hand brushed against something unexpected, a crumpled lottery ticket lodged deep in an overstuffed wooden drawer. At first, I almost dismissed it as just another relic of a past long forgotten, a small token from a time when hope was all I had. But as I retrieved it and ran my thumb along its worn edges, a strange mixture of nostalgia and cautious anticipation welled up inside me. That ticket, so unremarkable and tucked away for years, suddenly seemed to carry a weight far beyond its physical form. With a hesitant breath, I turned it over and examined the faded numbers printed on its surface, a $2 scratch-off ticket that had long since lost its luster but, in that moment, glimmered with the possibility of a turning point. The irony struck me hard. Here was a tiny piece of paper that had always embodied the fleeting, almost laughable promise of a better life, and yet it now demanded my full attention. I couldn't help but feel a mix of disbelief and reluctant hope as I fumbled for a coin, my hands trembling slightly with the knowledge that I was about to change everything. Slowly, deliberately, I began to scratch away the silver coating, the repetitive motion building a rhythm that echoed years of quiet dreams and hidden desires. Each stroke peeled away a layer of uncertainty, and as the numbers began to reveal themselves, my heart pounded with a growing realization that this was no ordinary moment, it was a whisper from fate. The numbers emerged, startlingly clear against the dull background, until finally, the full truth hit me like a tidal wave. I had just won $134 million. In an instant, the sheer scale of the win, especially when I considered that after taxes it would net me nearly $85 million, rendered every earlier disappointment insignificant. The unimaginable odds, 1 in 300 million, only deepened the wonder, as if the universe had conspired to flip my life on its head with this single, unassuming ticket. In that breathless moment, as I stared at the miracle in my hand, I began to see everything in a different light. The years of feeling overlooked, the constant comparisons, and every small moment of neglect converged into a single, undeniable truth: every hardship had built up to this point. That forgotten lottery ticket wasn't merely a piece of paper. It was a culmination of every quiet sacrifice, every lonely night, and every whispered prayer asking for a breakthrough. As I allowed the gravity of this revelation to sink in, I couldn't help but feel an overwhelming sense of vindication, a sign that even the most unremarkable things can harbor the most extraordinary destinies.
It was at that instant I realized that every setback in my life, every time I was passed over or made to feel small, had been quietly preparing me for this moment of transformation. The simplicity of the ticket, a mere $2 investment, had become the unlikely catalyst for rewriting my entire future. And amid the euphoria and shock, a voice inside me urged me to share this transformative energy. I found myself saying, not just to myself but to everyone who might one day feel overlooked or undervalued, if you believe that your struggles are shaping you for a greater purpose, then please click like and subscribe to join me in celebrating these moments of unexpected triumph. That quiet call to action wasn't just about social media, it was a reminder that each of us, no matter how small our beginnings or how silent our battles, carries the potential to unlock a destiny beyond imagination. And so, standing in that modest room where every forgotten paper and every faded memory converged into one breathtaking revelation, I embraced that $2 ticket as a symbol of hope, destiny, and the power to transform every seemingly insignificant detail of our lives into the cornerstone of our greatest success. Holding that miraculous win in my hands, I understood for the first time that my past was not a definition of my future. It was simply the prelude to a story that I was now determined to write on my own terms. Every neglected scrap, every quiet moment of despair, had led me to this long-awaited turning point, and in that moment, I vowed to never let another opportunity pass me by again.
After that life-altering win, I knew that my next step was to channel every ounce of my hard-earned resilience into rebuilding my life with purpose and precision. Immediately, I reached out to Carol, my trusted financial advisor and longtime confidant, and together, we embarked on the monumental task of transforming a sudden windfall into a legacy of stability and growth. I set up new bank accounts and formed an LLC, a necessary shield to receive my nearly $85 million, after taxes, anonymously, protecting my future from the pitfalls that have seen many lottery winners falter. Carol and I pored over every detail, devising carefully measured strategies that would keep me firmly in control of my destiny. Instead of succumbing to the wild temptations of impulsive splurges, we focused on disciplined, smart investments, a deliberate plan built with an eye toward long-term financial security. My very first major purchase was a sleek, black Tesla. It wasn't about vanity or excessive luxury. Rather, it stood as a symbol of reliability and a practical tool to navigate the road ahead. With its understated elegance, the car encapsulated the essence of my transition, from surviving to thriving. Not stopping there, I turned my attention to establishing a solid foundation with real estate. I acquired a modern, sun-drenched home in an upscale suburb, a house designed to be a sanctuary rather than a mere status symbol. Featuring expansive floor-to-ceiling windows that flooded each room with natural light, a spacious wraparound porch perfect for quiet reflection, and even a pool that promised moments of calm, this home was a deliberate choice. It was chosen not only for its aesthetic appeal, but for its capacity to serve as both a personal retreat and an asset that would appreciate over time. Not stopping there, I turned my attention to establishing a solid foundation with real estate. I acquired a modern, sun-drenched home in an upscale suburb, a house designed to be a sanctuary rather than a mere status symbol. Featuring expansive floor-to-ceiling windows that flooded each room with natural light, a spacious wraparound porch perfect for quiet reflection, and even a pool that promised moments of calm, this home was a deliberate choice. It was chosen not only for its aesthetic appeal, but for its capacity to serve as both a personal retreat and an asset that would appreciate over time. Every decision was made with precise deliberation. I diversified my investments further by putting money into blue-chip stocks known for steady dividends, and into promising tech startups whose innovation I believed would shape the future. With each calculated move, I wasn't just preserving wealth. I was reclaiming control over my destiny, shaking off the chains of a past defined by favoritism and neglect. Every dollar I invested was a testament to my newfound independence and a declaration that I was now the architect of my own future. In the midst of managing a portfolio that spanned from traditional assets to the exciting frontier of technology, I found moments of quiet satisfaction behind my computer screen. I would review digital charts, track market pulses, and witness my careful planning gradually morph into tangible financial freedom. It was during these long, reflective evenings in my modern sanctuary that I truly understood the magnitude of what I had achieved. Not only had I turned an inconceivably small lottery ticket into a fortune, but I had also learned how to build a life of discipline, foresight, and unwavering self-respect. Every step in this journey was a strategic response to years of being undervalued, a clear refutation of the limited options once forced upon me. With each investment, every thoughtful purchase, I was rewriting the narrative that once confined me to a life of scarcity. I felt a quiet surge of pride as I recognized that this process was more than acquiring wealth. It was about reclaiming my self-worth and transcending the definition of success that had been imposed upon me by the past. I was no longer defined by token gestures and overlooked potential. Now, every calculated decision reaffirmed that my future was mine to design. Today, as I sit in this bright, modern office and gaze out at the tranquil suburb beyond, I am reminded that true freedom comes from the power of informed choices. My journey isn't just about large numbers and impressive assets, but about the transformation of every hard-won lesson into a foundation for lasting prosperity. With Carol's guidance and my own relentless determination, I have crafted a future where every investment is not just a financial maneuver, but a declaration of independence, a signal that my destiny is now firmly in my hands. And as I move forward, I embrace each new opportunity with the conviction that investing in my future is the most enduring way to honor the struggles and triumphs that have brought me to this very moment. After my life was irrevocably changed, I soon discovered that my past wasn't willing to remain buried. It began when my phone, which had long been a silent witness to my solitude, started buzzing relentlessly with messages and calls. Unexpected notifications flooded in, urgent requests for financial help, proposals for family ventures, and even pleas for support on projects I never knew existed. I could almost hear the echoes of all those years of neglect, as if every ignored call and every snub had been saved for this moment. I felt the tug of old ties and the sting of familiar expectations that I had so long been trying to escape. Not long after that, I found myself hosting a family dinner in my new home, a setting that spoke proudly of my rebuilt life. The dining room, bathed in warm light and adorned with tasteful, modern touches, was meant to be a sanctuary of my success. But as the door opened and my estranged relatives stepped inside, I quickly realized that the atmosphere was anything but welcoming. They gathered around the long, polished table like characters from a script I had long wished to rewrite. Their eyes, filled with a curious mix of envy and condescension, fell upon every detail of my new life, the sleek decor, the subtle sophistication of the room, and even the state-of-the-art appliances that whispered of a future built on hard-earned victories. Throughout the meal, as courses were served and polite conversation flickered like fragile candlelight, one question after another was casually lobbed in my direction. "How did you afford such an impressive house?" one relative inquired, a tone that mingled admiration with thinly veiled disbelief. Another leaned forward asking, "That new car, your smart investments, they seem almost too good to be true. What's your secret?" With each inquiry, the weight of my past, the countless times I was given token gestures, the meager $2 lottery ticket that had once epitomized my world of neglect, pressed against my chest. I felt that all too familiar sensation of being measured against standards that were never meant for me. I could sense the unspoken reminder in every question. Before, I had been the one left with the scraps while others were showered with abundance. I recalled every slight I had endured, the days when a meager gift was the only acknowledgement of my existence, the endless comparisons where my achievements were barely mentioned. And now, here they were, expecting me to shoulder their unfulfilled dreams and contribute to their lavish schemes. The subtle guilt trips, wrapped in smiles and polite nods, were a stark reminder of the familial favoritism that had once consigned me to the shadows. In that charged moment, I felt a surge of defiant clarity rising within me. The very air in the room seemed to vibrate with unspoken accusations and the echoes of old wounds. I realized that this dinner wasn't just a reunion, it was a confrontation, a final test of the strength I had forged through years of struggle. With measured calmness, I responded, my voice firm yet tinged with the quiet sorrow of a lifetime unappreciated. "I understand that we all have our stories," I began, pausing as eyes shifted in anticipation, "but my story isn't built on the privileges of favoritism. I was given a $2 lottery ticket when I needed a chance, and I turned that chance into my future. I'm not here to fund dreams that were always meant for someone else. I'm here to build the life I earned." Even as my words hung in the air, I could see a flicker of surprise in their eyes, a mix of disbelief and the dawning realization that my journey was mine alone to command. Every carefully chosen word was a reclaiming of power, a declaration that the life I now led was forged from my own relentless determination, not from the misguided obligations of family loyalty. The questions that had once been weapons of guilt were now diffused by the truth of my experience. That night, as the dinner wound down and polite conversation gave way to uneasy silence, I felt the heavy chains of the past beginning to break away. I recognized that the confrontation wasn't about hostility. It was about reclaiming the narrative that had once kept me small. As I looked around the table, I knew I would no longer let the weight of anyone else's expectations define my worth. In that moment, I made a silent vow. I would invest in my own future, nurture my spirit, and never again be defined by the measure of someone else's love or the inadequacies of an ungrateful past. That dinner was more than a family reunion. It was a turning point. It showed me that true freedom comes from the courage to stand up for myself, even when faced with those who once helped write my story. And so, with a steady heart and a mind unburdened by old guilt, I stepped away from that table, ready to embrace a destiny that was entirely my own. Standing on the threshold of a new era, I now look back at the winding path that brought me here, a journey etched with hardship, quiet triumphs, and the relentless push against a fate predetermined by others. Through every overlooked moment and every small indignity, I learned that my value wasn't defined by favoritism or the comparisons that dimmed my light. It was forged in the quiet courage of my own convictions. As I sit here, bathed in the soft glow of the evening, I realize that all the struggles, the long nights, and the daily grind were not punishments but powerful lessons preparing me for this very moment of true liberation. In the solitude of these final reflections, I recall the whispers of my younger self, those quiet prayers and hidden vows made in the dark, that promised I was destined for more than the scraps that were handed down. I see now that every slight, every bitter reminder of being second best, was a stepping stone, slowly empowering me to build a future on my own terms. The familiar taste of neglect has been transformed into the sweet flavor of hard-won freedom. I understand, with crystal clarity, that my past is not a chain that binds me but the very foundation upon which I now stand, proud and unburdened. I've learned that true liberation comes not from escaping one's history, but from embracing it and harnessing its lessons to reshape the narrative of our lives. Each moment of solitude, each sacrifice made in the unyielding heat of hardship, has distilled into the unwavering belief that my destiny is mine alone to create. I now see that the value of a person isn't measured by what is given, but by what they dare to build out of nothing, by the quiet determination to rise when the world expects you to fall. As I gaze out at the golden hues of the setting sun, I feel a deep peace settle over my soul, a serene promise that every hardship was, in truth, an invitation to transcend the limits imposed on me. With a heart finally unburdened by old ghosts of favoritism and neglect, I step forward into a future where my worth is defined solely by my own dreams and the relentless drive to make them a reality. This is my story, a journey of transformation, resilience, and ultimate liberation. I invite you to believe that no matter how dark the past, every tomorrow holds the light of a new beginning. For in the quiet spaces of reflection, we find the courage to truly set ourselves free.